There's a specific way that society has been sabotaged, specific technique that's been utilized, and this can be understood or seen when the two movements or ideologies called feminism and federalism are both analyzed, and it can show how women and men have been deceived in mass respectively to their own detriment. And the way in which this is carried out is basically by a group of people who deceive by being an imposter. So let's start with feminism, right? So the name feminism, right, is similar to the word feminine, or is derived from the word feminine. So feminism, you would imagine, would be pro-feminine, right? Or certainly pro-woman, right? But the reality of what mainstream feminism is actually the complete opposite. It's actually anti-feminine, literally anti-feminine. They hate the natural feminine nature and try to eliminate it, and or at least distort it by encouraging women to abandon their femininity, saying it's something bad and weak, and instead to embrace masculinity. So they push this gender dysphoria, this mixing of the natural gender designs of men and women, and this is said to empower women, when in fact it does the opposite. So the key thing I just want to highlight here is they're using this term, feminism, that is actually an imposter of what it claims to be. It's doing the opposite of what you would imagine is the goal based on its own name, right? You would imagine feminism is pro-feminine, and in reality, at its core, all they're doing day and night is telling women to stop being feminine, encouraging them to be more masculine. So it's a hatred for femininity. It's an attack on femininity. It's not supporting femininity. So likewise, in the United States, at the forming of the country back in the late 1700s, following the American Revolution, following the War of Independence, 1776, there was this debate and gathering of minds and politicians and lawyers and revolutionaries working on forming the Constitution. And when the Constitution, the Convention for the Constitution came into being in 1787, there was a group that called themselves the Federalists. So a federation in this context is a group of independent states, right? The 13 states, the 13 colonies, the 13 states that form a federation voluntarily, where they agree to work together in a few matters, like international relations or common defense. But it's a federation or an organization of independent states. That it's not an establishment of a centralized federal government as we know it today, right? So this group that started calling themselves the Federalists were actually anti-federalism. They were actually intent on destroying a federation of independent states and forming a centralized national government. And that's what they ended up accomplishing. And many true revolutionaries were aware of this, namely Patrick Henry and George Mason, and they opposed this new constitution. They recognized, well, this is just going to form tyrannical centralized power, just like we were fighting against, against the British Empire. And today, in American history or whatever history book you're looking at, those that opposed the Constitution as it was being pushed through at this convention are called anti-federalists, but in reality, they were pro-federalism. They were pro-federation of independent states. So, the Federalist Papers were given in history class. If you take American history, and then you have the anti-federalist papers. But again, what are called the Federalists and their papers, their writings, the Federalist Papers, aren't actually pro-federalism, pro-federation. They use that purposely as a deceptive tactic. They were being an imposter, posing as Federalists, and so they gave themselves that name so that people would be more likely to trust them and overlook the elements that they were putting in the Constitution that were clearly anti-federalist or anti-free independent states, right? And we're setting up the country to become just another government with a centralized power. So this is the tactic that was used with feminism, and this is the tactic that was used with the forming of the United States government, the federal government in particular. And it's something to become aware of and wary of. Just because someone, gives themselves a title or forms a group with a certain nice sounding name, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they're about, right? They could actually be about the complete opposite of what the name says. Like Department of Defense comes to mind, right? Actually more about aggression than defense, and so on and so forth, right? Like George Orwell in his book 1984, illustrated this many times, with these different departments, that actually did the opposite of what the title claimed, right? Like the Department of Peace is really a Department of War, and so on. So if you're wondering why the country is such a hot mess, it's largely due to people being deceived by these groups that are imposters of the movement and ideology that they take the title of.